Hello, Professor Morgan here with a video about revision. Now, there is sometimes people say, what's the difference between revision and editing? Well, we can sometimes they're synonymous, but we're going to kind of focus on the concept of revision, and revision basically is to see again. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. All right, so revision is more than just fixing grammar mistakes. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I got to revise this. I'm just going to go through and run through Grammarly, and then it's revised." Well, no, it's really, if you want to really kind of get technical or look at it a different way, look at it a different way. It's looking at the work as a whole and thinking, what's really working here? What really works here? Again, revision means to see again. Vision is to see, re is to see again. So it's more than just looking at, just making minor tweaks. It's like really the whole overall kind of concept. Now, moving on, sometimes that as we're doing revision in our work, there's this thing called kill your darlings. Okay. And this is a phrase you may have heard or may not have heard. Okay. But kill your darlings. And the concept here is that it's sometimes we must destroy what you like to get what you love. Okay. Now, what does that really mean? So sometimes we're writing and then we finish our story and then, we're trying to figure out, okay, I'm doing revision and what works, what doesn't work and whatever. So to kind of drive this point home, I'm going to tell you a little story. Okay. It's story time. So, all right. So in this story, we have this young gentleman here who is a aspiring photographer. And so he loves to take photos and, he's out taking photos one day and he notices that just down the way a little bit is a more seasoned, photographer. Just happens to be a female, and he sees that she's kind of taken kind of the same area that he is, and so he kind of gets brave and goes over and starts chatting with her, and she's a professional photographer. She owns her own studio. She's very established, and he's like, "Oh, I'm really trying to break into the business." And she said, "Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you come to my studio? Bring your 10 best pictures, and I will, critique them and give you some insight." He said, she's like, "Someone helped me when I was getting going, and I'll be happy to do that for you." He's like, "Oh, that would be great." So they exchange information, and so he takes his portfolio of his 10 best pictures that he's taken, and he goes to her studio, and um, she looks through each picture and she places them into one of two piles. Like, this is a really good picture, and this is one that not so much. And he was like, okay. And she kind of tried to explain a little bit why, and what worked and what was whatever. And he's like, okay. He's like, well, can I take some more pictures? She's like, well, to be fair, it's going to take some time for you to develop your skill. Why don't you come back in a year and with 10 more photos, and then we'll see how you've done. So they do this process for the course of 10 years. 10 years goes by. And at the end of the 10th year, so they finish. Um, and she's like, you know what? You've been coming here for 10 years. And every single year you bring me 10 pictures. Every single year you bring me a picture that I always put in this is not a good picture kind of, this is not one of your stronger your pieces of work um, pile, but you keep putting it back into your portfolio. Why do you keep doing that? And his answer was, because I had to climb a mountain to take that picture. Now, I'm not making any editorial comments about whether this is a good picture or not. It's the point of the story. But in his mind, he put so much time and effort into getting to the point where he could take the picture that he felt like it must be worth something. And it may be worth the experience of having to get there. But maybe it just what doesn't fit. I mean, especially if, let's say, this, he's collecting a bunch of pictures of rivers and forests, kind of up close and personal, and then he's got this one thing of this big widescape of mountains. It wouldn't really fit. It's not necessarily that it's a bad picture, but it doesn't really fit the what else is kind of going along with it. That's maybe one other way to look at it. So, to kill your darlings doesn't necessarily mean that what you're killing is bad. It just may not fit. Okay. So let me kind of give you an example. Another example of when it kind of comes to revision. Okay. And so this is my second book called The Waxing Moon. It is the sequel to the first book, which is called The Hidden Sun. And so when the first book came out, and the publisher was very happy with it, and it was in bookstores and stuff like this, and I had an idea for the second book, and I had the character, the plot, the storyline all figured out, and I wrote it all out, and I felt really good about the story. I thought it was really strong. I thought it was stronger than the first book. There was one little challenge though. The first book that was well received was 100,000 words long. It's a speculative fiction book, so it's a little bit longer because I had to do some world building. And when I finished writing the sequel, it was only 60,000 words. And the publisher's like, yeah, it needs to, that's, that's not quite what we're looking for. We need a little, we need a little more. And I'm like, well, I don't want to just pad it out for the sake of padding it out because the story itself was really strong. And so I got thinking about it. And what I ended up doing was adding a series of subplots. So where the first book was much more, I don't know, epic in nature, where it had, several main characters that, they told this overall story. The second story focused mainly on this character right here. And his experiences. And I thought, well, okay, but his story is part of just the larger story. So I actually added some subplots, some secondary characters that augmented and worked seamlessly into the story, and added for a better story, and really fleshed out the book to make it even better than it was. So in this case, I wasn't killing any darlings. I actually needed to create more darlings, as it were. But they weren't fluff. They were actually, like I said, they were subplots and secondary characters, and these are things that we're actually going to be looking at, when, that's what you should be looking at when you're creating stories. Okay, so some final thoughts when it comes to revision. I've had students, because I'm a professor, I've had students say to me, I hate revision. Why should I have to revise? I've already done this once. And I'm like, revision is part of the writing process. And I even had one student in a composition class say, well, what happens if I get it right the first time? If it's just perfect the first time? And I'll be like, well, you're the first person in history forever. I mean, as a professional author, as an associate professor of English, I mean, I'll write even emails. I'll write an email and then I'll go back through and reread it before I send it, and I'll always find something to fix. Stories are never done; they're only due. You can revise and revise and revise and revise and revise. There's always ways to make things better. Okay. Now there is a point in time where you just call it good. Okay. However, and how is your revision process going to go? It really kind of depends on you as an individual. For me, I have like a 17-step plan that I actually kind of have typed up and said, hey, this is how I do things. I'm hesitant to share that with others because that's what works for me and may not work for other folks. But it's really, I would suggest, if at all possible, to take some time away from it and to be able to get back to it. Because once, the last thing I'm going to say about this is, when I get done with a book, I am so sick and tired of it. Because I have been living it, breathing it, thinking about it. It's just all encompassing, and I'm so tired of everything, but I know it inside and out, which I need to because I want to make sure it's as good as it could possibly be. And then I just can't stand to look at it for a while. And then I'll come back, a long time later and go, this wasn't what this actually turned out pretty well. So anyway, there's your thoughts on and insight on revision. Enjoy.